Hi everyone. I'm Gail Renard. I'm the treasurer of the Guild, former chair as well. It's lovely to see so many writers, whatever the collective noun is, a scribble of writers. And I'm really pleased. I will be introducing our special guest in 1 second. But just to say that the Writers Guild always has your back. Anytime you have any problems or legal problems, please, we have a casework team, and you can contact them anytime, and they'll come back to you very, very promptly. So there's all sorts of advice always on tap for you. My pleasure to introduce Robert Taylor. Hi, Robert, who has
I
written this fantastic new book, and I have a feeling this might not be the right cover for it because I got
no, I've got it's slightly changed, but it's
yeah.
more or less the same.
I got a rare early edition before it was published. And if I can say, Robert is the WGGB lawyer, and he's also, aside from being a lawyer and barrister, he's a writer, and he's the only lawyer barrister I know who wrote Chucklevision. Uh, and we go back a long way. So, what made you write the book, Robert? Sorry, that sounds a bit, I don't mean
Well,
coercion.
it was kind of going back to my early days as a writer, and yeah, I always remember meeting Gail actually at a Chucklevision story meeting too many years ago to remember now. And I was a very naive writer at that stage, you know, just having my first contracts and things. And I didn't really know anything about them. I just used to sign them and hope for the best. And Gail came to the meeting and wowed everyone immediately with wisecracks, and everyone was a bit down in the dumps before trying to come up with yet another hilarious slapstick story for the Chucks. And she lifted the whole thing. And then I remember we all went for lunch, and she sat everyone down around the table and went round and said, "Are you a member of the Writers Guild? Are you a member of the Writers? Are you a member?" And then laid it on the line to us: "You've got to join the Guild because they are the ones who've got your back," just as she said now. And so I did. I went away and I joined the Guild, and I started to get interested in authors' rights and what was in the contract and what it all meant and what was copyright. And through that, I had basically, after a few years, I had a career change. I did a law degree and qualified as a barrister, then changed to becoming a solicitor, and, you know, was able to bring the two things together and have a great job, which a job I really love doing is being the legal advisor to the Guild. And so thinking about all of those things, and during lockdown, particularly when I kind of started really writing the book, I had this idea that actually what I would have really liked to have had in those early days was a guide to copyright that I could have understood as a writer, not as a lawyer. And as that progressed, I kind of thought, well, actually, I could try and tell that story of copyright through works, through books, through films, through music, through art, not through dry legal principles. And obviously the legal principles have got to be there, and I have to talk about, you know, those sorts of things, but there's a different way of doing it. And so that's when I started seriously writing the book, and, you know, and here it is.
Yeah, and can I say, having read the book, I actually enjoyed it because actually the clues in the title, copyright made easy, but who would have thought you can actually make copyright fun? It's very well written and under, totally understandable. But let's look into a few questions here. Where to start because there's so much. Um, I get a lot of questions, and I think the Guild does, from writers who are worried about directors and producers trying to suddenly grab their credit or part of their credit and part of their money, claiming that they've contributed to the script or whatever. What what do you recommend?
Yeah, I know that's a really big problem, and you know, it's not something. I think it's something that's been around for a while, and it's not going away. And you know, it's a frustrating thing for for a copyright lawyer in the UK, because we have something in the UK called moral rights, which was not traditionally part of the law in the UK, but was introduced from European copyright law in the 90s, early part of the 90s. And moral rights are supposed to be about the part of your rights that are not about commercial terms. They're not about buying and selling something, which was a traditional way that copyright was dealt with in the UK. In continental Europe, they have this idea of author's rights, which puts much more emphasis on the fact that if you've written a book, if you've created something, you've written a script, then that is something that says something about you. It's connected to you in a way that can't be taken or shouldn't be taken away simply by selling the rights or signing an agreement. So that was introduced to UK law, which was great. But unfortunately, the way it was done was in a way that actually is not very effective. So as probably most people know, as screenwriters, you will have a waiver of moral rights in your agreement, which basically says that the moral right of paternity, which is sexist, but it's basically the right to be recognized as the author of the script, is waived, that you don't have that right anymore. And that's totally contrary to the way that moral rights should work. You shouldn't be able to give them away or waive them. They should be something that they're integral to you as a person.
But what happens if a director or producer says, again, I've contributed to this?
So you're in UK law, you're totally dependent on your contract. Either your individual contract or the minimum terms agreement that the guild has negotiated on your behalf with the BBC or whoever it is. And the minimum terms agreements will have protections in them. If you're not signing that sort of agreement, if you're an agreement with an independent producer or something, it's totally down to what the contract says about your credit. And if the credit says that if a new writer comes in and writes or is deemed to have written on the script, then you have to share your credit. And when you share your credit, you'll probably also have to share your fees. So there are ways that you can protect yourselves in a contract by, for instance, making sure that if you do have to share the credit, they can't take more than 50% of the fee away, or whatever percentage it is. Because I've had cases where, yeah, exactly that. A director comes in on a film project. Suddenly they say they've written most of the script, and the writer has to, get rid of about 80% of their fee because the director is claiming the rest of it. So clauses in the agreement that basically protect that say that you can't lose more than whatever 50% is the usual thing are really important.
And
the Guild also has a credit arbitration scheme for films, which we're kind of extending, which is also should also make sure that your contract in a film contract says that it's subject to arbitration by the script credit arbitration agreement. And that means that in that situation, if a director claims they've written most of the script, a team of expert arbitrators appointed by the Guild will examine all the scripts and decide who's actually written what, and they will apportion the credits according to what they think it is. So it's really important on a film contract to have that script arbitration clause in the agreement.
That's fascinating, Robert, because also, which I've often said to writers, and do you agree, that writers, even if you have a great agent and you have the Guild behind you, read your contracts.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, and that's kind of how I started, by reading these things. And, and I was a graduate and I thought I was fairly, intelligent and whatever. And it was all just kind of, gobbledygook to me. So the more you read the contracts, the more you'll understand. If you don't understand the contracts, ask someone, go to the Guild. As Gail said, that we've got some great caseworkers, John, Eleanor, and Joe. And if you've got any questions about a contract, take it to them, and they'll be able to answer your questions. And that's again, a really important thing that the Guild offers. It's it's a great service, and all for free. Don't have to pay any lawyers' fees.
Yes, thank you. And also, if you see a clause in your contract about your firstborn son, please ring the Guild, because it's probably not it's probably not kosher.
I've seen a few of those. I've seen quite a few of those in my time. Sort of. Do you want my arm as well? Shall I chop my arm off and give it to you?
It makes it harder. In the old days, when they used to use a form contract, it was easier because you could tell if the studio crossed something out or added something by hand. But because now everything is obviously digitalized, you can't see that they might have changed the Guild agreement, a minimum terms agreement. So, it's be careful. But can I ask you about another thing
I
that
always
we
look at lawyers. Well, people may do this anyway. Always look at the info on a document and see who's been editing it. always do that. See who's edited the document.
That is brilliant. That's why you're a solicitor and barrister. Can I ask you about NDAs, which is non-disclosure agreements and confidentiality, because that is major right now.
Yeah, so we see a lot. So yeah, again, this is something that really didn't necessarily wasn't part of our industry for a long time. But again, I guess it's kind of an American thing that these are more and more common now, with people being asked to sign NDAs. And it depends on the situation you're in and exactly what it covers, because people often think that an NDA means that you can't say anything about anything. And often they are drafted in these very wide-ranging ways. But really, a non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality agreement can only protect information that is actually confidential. So it doesn't stop you talking about, what you had for dinner or stuff like that, or, so they are much more limited than people often think, and they are used often to scare people and make them fear that there's going to be some terrible consequences if they say anything, particularly in dispute areas, where a writer may be in dispute with a producer or something, and they'll get very heavy NDAs trying to stop them from doing anything, from going to the press or even just talking about it to the Guild or whatever. So again, they can't stop you, say, from talking to the Guild about something. They can't do that. You're allowed to get advice on an issue that you're worried about within a contract or within an agreement. They can't, whatever the confidentiality clause says, they can't stop you from doing that. Can't stop you from getting proper advice on an agreement.
No. What about the other way around? Because when a writer is going to pitch an idea to a company or broadcaster or whatever, I know one or two writers who make a company sign a confidentiality agreement, because what does the writer do from our end?
Well, yeah, I mean, there have been quite famous cases about using confidentiality clauses or agreements, and yeah, they can be very useful, because again, if you look at copyright is sort of one of the truisms is that it protects the expression of an idea, not the idea itself, and that's right. So to get copyright, the work that you produce has to be original enough, which isn't a particularly high standard, but it has to be more than maybe a couple of lines, and it has to be in a fixed form, as we say. So it has to be written down or recorded somewhere. So in a situation where maybe you're exchanging ideas or just pitching things, you have to think about, what are my legal rights here? What are the situation I'm in? Because it can be that you could be giving away something that is really valuable, some great idea. And if you haven't recorded it, if there's nothing in writing, if you are not sure about the circumstances you're talking to the other person in, it can be really difficult. So yeah, it's worth being aware of that. I think the great case that sort of really highlighted this is quite an old case now, but back in, I think it was the 70s, there was a series called Rock Follies.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember that? Yeah. Okay. So, and basically, this was a group of women who had two great ideas. Really, they decided they'd form a group, which was really quite revolutionary to have like a group of women in a pop group, because in those days it was all about Beatles and Stones. It was all guys doing it. And then they also had this great idea, which was, I don't think they've ever really got the recognition they deserve. They decided to make a TV show about them making the pop group. So really, they kind of they really invented reality TV, because they were basically playing themselves, but in heightened forms as the members of this group. And they went and talked to a producer. I think famously it was in a Chinese restaurant, and the producer agreed that he would make the show for them, and they'd all work together. And he sold the program, and of course they were all cut out. The show was made with different people, so they sued the broadcaster and said, basically, when we spoke to the producer, what we were talking about was in confidence. He was there as a professional producer. We were there as professional performers and creators, and so the conversations we had were confidential, even though there was nothing in writing. I think there was like a few scrawls on a napkin or something or other, but there was no legal contracts, nothing. And the court agreed with them and said, and awarded them, a substantial part of the program.
Oh, well, thank you.
So think about the situations you're in. If you send just ideas to people, I always send it to a specific person and say it's confidential. You don't necessarily need a whole complicated NDA. But if the person, you send it to a producer working for a company, you can get protection from that.
Thank you. And also, I always suggest keep a trail of your emails or any. It used to be a paper trail. Now it's more likely to be an email trail.
Yeah, again, 100%. That's really, really important, both in terms of who you're sending stuff to, but also in terms of the way your work develops. So save different copies of it so you can see how the work has developed. Because if you do get into a situation where there's a dispute about the copyright, you can then prove who you've sent the work to, and you can prove what was in existence at a particular time. So if you get into a situation where one person is saying, oh, well, that was my idea, and you're saying, no, that was my idea, you'll be able to show when exactly you came up with that idea. Yeah. So it's really important to make sure that you keep good records. It's just basic professional sense.
Oh, thanks. I was going to say, people are asking to see the book again. I'm sure you won't mind.
Yeah. So the book's called Copyright Made Easy, and if you go, it's available on Amazon. It's available as a print book or as an ebook, and I've also done an audio book, so you can download that and listen to my wonderful voice droning on about copyright law.
I look forward to you doing the musical. But
it's in development. It's in development.
A few questions from. Oh, I will be taking questions later. But is it worth putting a copyright symbol? Sorry, this is from. Is it worth putting a copyright symbol on a pitch deck, or does that smack of cat paranoia?
Very good question. I love the copyright symbol because you should always use it, but it has absolutely no effect. So basically, the copyright symbol is an invention of US copyright law in the 50s, when they had a very different system of copyright to pretty much everyone else on Earth. And so that's where the copyright symbol comes from. But it no longer has any legal effect. Whether or not copyright applies to a work or not exists. It totally depends on the creation of the work. Once the work is created in a form that is original, then copyright applies to it. You don't have to register copyright. You don't have to apply for any certificates or anything at all. As long as it's created in an original form by someone who qualifies, which is basically everyone, then copyright exists. It kind of copyright comes into creation with the creation of the work, and so putting copyright symbols on it does not make any difference to whether or not its copyright pertains to the work. But I always think you should put it on because it just shows people that you are claiming copyright over the work, and it will make them think about, yeah, you know, someone is claiming rights in this. So always do it. Always put copyright symbols in. It doesn't make any difference.
Oh, well, thank you. There's another question. A few people have asked. I'd be interested to know what happens when you submit scripts to writer schemes, such as BBC Open Call, there are a lot of those. And can I just say, always check.
I can't say specifically about any scheme. So this is just like generally, but again, check the terms and conditions to see what rights you may be giving away to your work, because it could, some schemes are less scrupulous than others, and it could be that you're actually ceding copyright in the work, or you're giving them the right of first refusal to produce it, or all kinds of stuff. Or if it is then turned into a series, then they get 30% of the profits or whatever it is. It could, there's lots of stuff. So make sure you read the terms and conditions and you're aware of what it is you're signing up to.
Yes, because some schemes actually take your copyright. And
yeah, no, I've seen that. Yeah, I mean, they tend to be quite unscrupulous things, and probably the sort of things where they're asking you to pay to enter as well.
yes,
So it's a double whammy. You pay and they take all your rights. So
yeah.
how does that work?
Well, is it fair to say there are a lot of people making money off writers these days?
There are, yes, yeah. It always seems to me that there's more people making money off writers than actually writers themselves. So
yes.
It's like being at the wrong end of the pyramid kind of thing.
Yes. Also, can I ask you about here's a good one. Another title for a musical: copyright and employment law, because where do writers fit in?
Right. Yeah. So again, that's a really good point, and particularly these days where we're getting a lot more crossover situations. So, for instance, if you're working in a writer's room or something like that, that could be in a situation where you're actually deemed to be either an employee or a worker. Worker's status is a kind of hybrid where you're not actually don't have full employment rights, but you do have some rights, which generally turn things like working time regulations and things like that. But that can be very important to someone who is actually, working in a substantial way in a situation like a writer's room. And it's not going to be all writer's rooms. And if you're just kind of going to the studios for a day or something like that, it's probably not going to qualify. But if you're actually engaged on a much more long-term basis, then you could be, you could have those additional rights. But then again, on the other side of the coin, it's something to be wary of, particularly if you're in a situation where you're not working as a writer, but you may be working in some other capacity, say for a broadcaster or a production company. And there's an assumption in copyright law that the first owner, so the normal situation is that the first owner of the copyright is the person who creates it, i.e. the author. But if the person who creates it is an employee and they're creating it in the course of their work, then the employer is the first owner of the copyright. And that works fine, say, if you're working in an advertising agency or something like that, and you realize that everything you're doing is basically you're being commissioned to do the copywriting or whatever it is for your agency. But there are situations where, say, I've actually been dealing with a case like this really recently, where my client was basically working in a production capacity for a broadcaster, but they were also a screenwriter, and they'd had a little bit of success as a screenwriter, and they were a young person, so they're just trying to get their foot in the door and get experience by working in television, but also trying to get a series together and so on. And they became concerned because the employment contract says, as well as it being the kind of standard form of law, but also the contract says that anything they create in the course of their employment is owned by the employer. And there was also another clause in the contract which said that they have to devote all of their time to their employer, and anything that they don't, and anything they do while during their employment is owned by the employer. So there are kind of two clauses in the agreement. And he became very concerned about that and wasn't really getting anywhere. And so I started writing to them, and it was really difficult because these are HR people, and I don't think they were doing it kind of out of some malicious thing. I do think it was just ignorance, but they just couldn't see what the problem was. They were just saying, "Oh, it's all right, fine. You do your writing, fine. You do your writing." And we were saying, well, look, but you've got to change the contract. You've got to change the contract to acknowledge that this is what he's doing, and you're not going to claim any rights in it. And it's really difficult to get them to do that, to get them to change the contract.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So that's so think about those situations. If you are in those kind of dual roles, think about what that means to you.
Thank you. And also, what surprises a lot of people is the length of a writer's copyright. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So copyright now lasts for your whole life, and then for 70 years after you die, basically. So right now we're looking at 1953. So basically, in the UK, works were created before 1953 are basically out of copyright, but most things are after that are probably still in. Sorry, I always get this. I always say this the wrong way around. So basically, if authors who died before 1953, their works are probably out of copyright. If the writer is still alive or died after 1953, their work's probably still in copyright.
Oh, well, thank you. And it means their families or heirs profit after death.
Yeah, so that's kind of slowly increased over the years, and it's basically sort of to try and acknowledge that there should be two generations who will benefit from a writer's or any creator's copyright. That's the way they kind of deem it. And so yeah, the duration of copyright is very complicated because it has changed, and particularly in America, it's changed massively over the course of the 20th century. So if you are, from a writer's perspective, if you're looking to adapt a book, something like that, you need to be really sure about where the rights are and whether or not it's still in copyright.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of questions coming in here about, well, because we're a global industry now and all the rest. Let's start with this one and we'll go on to another. Does registering a script with the WGA offer much protection?
So in terms of copyright, it doesn't really offer protection. The point of the WGA scheme is to basically record the form of the work, and so if you get into a dispute about the script, again, you can show when it was held by the WGA, and so that will show when it was in existence and the form it was at that stage. So I would never not encourage anyone to use the WGA scheme. If that's what you want to do to kind of to do that bit of housekeeping, if you like, then yeah, then do it. But there are other ways of doing it. And in particular, I don't think it's a substitute from having proper working practices yourself and keeping track of what you're doing and stuff like that. Because in the end, that's what it's going to come down to.
Oh, thank you. Another question here. The questions are pouring in. Keen to hear about US-based streaming platforms and legal agreements with those big international corporate entities, i.e. Netflix and the rest.
Yeah, well, it's a completely different ball game because they've come in with massively the deals often seem very attractive, but when you work it out, they're often much less attractive. But certainly they've come in with big upfront payments, and that's often, obviously, for anyone, it is an attractive thing. But what they're also doing is just hoovering up rights. So with most, the sort of standard Netflix deal is they get all the rights forever, and you don't get a penny more, and that's it. That they'll pay you once and forget about you. So that's not really something that I certainly believe is a fair system. However much you're paid up front, you should be paid for writing the work, for the work that you put in for writing it, but then you should also be paid for the actual success of the work, for the exposure the work gets, for the people watching it or buying whatever it is, downloading it, streaming it. You should be paid for that, for the use of the work that you've created. And I think that's a fair system. Whether or not we'll ever get to a stage where we have got that deal, that the Guild has got a deal now with Netflix. I'm never really sure how close to being finalized it is. So so I'm not sure how much I can talk about it.
No.
But yeah, no, we have got significant improvements to what was there before. But it's still, it's still a work in progress. It's still something in negotiating with a union, as Gail knows, you never quite get everything you want, but it's better to have an agreement and then try and improve it than it is to have no agreement. And so, we're starting with Netflix.
Yeah. And also, sorry, hay fever. Noel Coward wrote it. I have it. It's probably fair to say, to add that different countries have different copyright laws. America's different to UK, which is different to EU. Is that fair? Or?
Oh yeah, but I mean, but the sort of the basic kind of nucleus of copyright law is pretty much universal, because copyright since the 19th century has been subject to international treaties. The first one was the Berne Convention, and you had the Universal Copyright Treaty, and now you've got the TRIPS Treaty. So it's been constantly updated. But yeah, for instance, as we sort of touched on, America still has a system of copyright registration, and until 1986, you had to register work in the US with the Copyright Office, and they had this a very different system for duration of copyright, which is why it's so complicated now to work out whether or not something is in copyright in the US or not. But that kind of basic nucleus is the same. But if you are dealing with a country and somewhere outside the UK, it's best to think about, what are the different situations that pertain in that country.
Yes.
Nearly all countries in the world are part of these international agreements now, but some aren't, like Iran, Somalia, Uzbekistan, couple of other countries. So again, I've had a few Iranian clients over the years, and it's been really difficult sometimes to establish their rights and things in the UK and in the West, because because they're not part of the international copyright treaties, their rights are not respected. Whereas one of the functions of the copyright treaties is basically to mean that so if, for instance, someone in the UK has the same rights in the US as a US author, and the US author has the same rights in the UK as a UK writer. So it's a reciprocal arrangement that's recognized. But if you're not part of that system, you're out in the cold, basically.
Oh, well, thank you. And also, it's always, I mean, my main thing is if you're going to use something which you think is out of copyright or whatever, check and check again. Never assume and all that. There's some more questions coming in. I was going to say before we get to some questions, because people are asking about books and theatre and copyright.
Yep.
Do you want to say something about that?
So yeah, so copyright in the theatre, dramatic works are basically are recognised as having copyright in the same way as literary works. So there's not really any difference in terms of the copyright there. The big difference is probably in contracts, and I have to say that I'm not an expert in theatre contracts, but on the whole, they're a lot more favourable to writers than most film and TV agreements, which is the areas I work more in, because most theatre agreements, you're just giving the producer of the play a license to use the work. So the writer retains ownership of the work, and the producer just gets a license, a sort of permission to stage the play. Whereas in film and TV, it's much more common to have an assignment, which basically means you sell the work to the producer. So in an assignment situation, it's like selling a house. You sell it, you don't have any more rights over it. That's it. You move out, and a new person moves in. Whereas with a license, it's basically like more like a rental situation. So you rent your property, someone else moves in, but at the end of the tenancy, you get the house back, and they move out, you get the house back, and you can let it out again, or you can move back in, whatever it is.
Oh,
It's more complicated than that, but that's a kind of very basic difference between a license and a assignment.
Thanks. And what about books? Is it very different from copyright?
So again, so generally, so the copyright is basically the same. There's no difference. Copyright covers literary, dramatic, musical, and artistic works. So it's all the same. There's not really any difference in terms of the way, well, certainly in terms of literary and dramatic works. Artistic works are slightly, the way that they're protected is different, but that's not really something that concerns us. Now, and again, publishing contracts are usually more favorable to the writer. Certainly traditionally, the publisher would just take a license to publish the book, and all of the other rights would stay with the writer. Obviously, these days, publishers are more savvy, maybe more business-like, and want more and more rights. They want, they want to think about, well, if the book is adapted as a TV series or as a musical or whatever it is, they want to get rights over that as well. Maybe traditionally they just wouldn't have been interested in that. They wouldn't have seen that as part of their business. They would have been quite happy to let someone else deal with that.
Yes, I mean, that I find more and more is important, that if you've written, let's say, a book, don't automatically hand over film rights, television rights, radio rights.
Yeah.
Show on ice, because those are very, very valuable rights.
Yeah, no, absolutely, totally endorse that. Think again, obviously you may not be in a position to negotiate on these things, but you should at least know what you're signing away. And if you can retain stuff yourself, then it is worth it's obviously worth doing that.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's worth saying, well, why do you need all these rights? You don't need all these rights to publish a book.
No, and there used to be a practice in publishing, which I don't believe is written, but a sort of gentleman's agreement.
Mm.
Uh, and I've used this lately because I'm not a gentleman. That if your book has been out of print for a year, then you
Yeah,
could write to the publisher and ask for the rights to be reverted.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
But the problem was, I mean, technically, if a book is also an ebook, is it ever really out of print? But
Yep. So I had a massive fight with that over a book, and actually, my client in that case was the son of a author who was, quite famous and very successful in the 60s, but and had produced some really good work, and people were interested in it. But unfortunately, he'd signed a deal with a publisher who'd then gone out of business, and his business had been taken by really a very, very shady and unpleasant person who was doing nothing to publicize or promote my client's father's work, and just was just sitting on the rights, basically waiting for someone to come along with a film deal or something like that. And that was his basic argument is, oh well, you can go online and buy it, and oh, it's always available. And it took me about a year of like lying in, well, not, that's probably I'm being unpleasant myself, but
you
kind of
didn't mean
told
to
my
say
client it's
that
going to
word.
be a waiting game where basically we would just have to kind of wait and monitor the situation. We used a book monitoring service to basically tell us how many copies of this book had been sold. And over about a year, we gathered a load and load of evidence to show that this book was just not being sold anywhere. It just wasn't available. We had reports from bookshops, and in the end, we blasted the publisher with all this stuff, and he just had to concede and say, yeah, okay, the rights have reverted. And he hated doing it,
Oh,
but
I'm sure.
we were basically in a situation where he he was, we had all the evidence and he had nothing.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
I'm
Because
really pleased to say, sorry, just to finish, the books now, my client's father's books are now been republished by a really great publisher, and I spoke to him last week, and he's got a film deal bubbling away for his father's
fantastic,
book. So yeah,
fantastic.
it was a really, really good outcome.
And may I say, I've had recently book rights reverted to me that has I've since sold on. So always ask and always take advice because anything is possible in the best of all possible worlds. There's a question which we wanted to talk about anyway about how AI affects copyright.
Well, fantastic question. If only I
Mm.
knew the answer, I would I'd be very rich and living in California or somewhere.
Yes, we're all.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's kind of there's two issues really, your two kind of very, very broad issues. One, of course, is the way that the chatbots have been trained using work that's in copyright, and whether or not that's an infringement of copyright. And as you probably know, there are dozens now of law cases going in the US about that, with big groups of writers, publishers, uh, and other creative professionals basically suing all of the big chatbot companies, saying it's an infringement of copyright. You've used my work to train this machine. And and to me anyway, what I've read of the cases, it seems pretty much a slam dunk, as the American says. You can feed in stuff into one of these things, and it comes out with basically pages of text that are identical to a famous writer's work. And these aren't,
Really?
it's not just something, oh, it's in the style of, it's word for word the same. So
Gosh, I
it's
didn't
obvious
realize.
that it's that these things have been trained on those works, to me anyway. Obviously,
Thank
it's
you.
all still out. I don't think the cases have even got to court yet. They're still running through all of the preliminaries.
No, can I
So,
add? Yeah.
so I think that I think that people should be cautious. I know a lot of people are basically wanting to do deals, and I think a lot of the big chatbot companies are trying to do
Mm.
deals with creative organizations and groups of creative people. But I think it's too early. I wouldn't want to agree terms at the moment with them, because I think that you could be selling yourself short and selling your clients short. If you wait a few years, see what the outcome of these cases are, you could be in a way stronger position. So don't negotiate when you know you're in a weak situation.
Oh, thank you, Robert. That's
So
fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but and then of course the other thing is, which again the Guild's been involved in, and we've got some
Mm.
guidelines about this, is what happens when writers use the chatbots themselves, when they use AI themselves in their work. And obviously, given what we've just said, there are risks here because you could be infringing someone's copyright, and a lot of it is going to depend on obviously what those cases, the outcomes of those cases are, but also the way you use it. Because if you use it in a very broad brush way, then it could be, you could very easily be infringing copyright. But if you use it in a much more subtle way, then it may not be the same kind of outcome. And I think I don't know if this is the example we've got, but like if you say type in, to the chatbot, create the character of an Italian plumber, and it comes back with something from Super Mario, then it's pretty obvious it's going to be an infringement of copyright. But if you're a bit more subtle about what you actually type in, an Italian plumber that's got problems at home and sort of supports AC Milan and blah blah blah. I know, you may actually be not infringing copyright, maybe actually creating something that is new. I don't, it's a
Okay.
possibility.
I know.
But you've got to think about that. If you are going to use it, you've got to be, and also think about, is your contract saying you will not use AI? Most contracts will say that you will give a guarantee that all of the work is your own. But if you used AI to create it, can you give that guarantee?
Oh, thank you. Because the other thing as well is with everything we're saying is don't take chances, because if you take a chance and end up getting sued, it can cost a lot of money, and nobody wants to get to that stage. By the way, somebody has asked, yes, this is being recorded. It will be available on the Guild's YouTube channel afterwards, because there's, as someone has said quite rightly, there's a lot of information, and people will want to
Yeah,
go
yeah. And
back
sorry, I'm
over it.
probably gabbling and rambling on too
No,
much.
no, no. It's,
In
you're
your
full
way.
of information. So let's see what else in the time we have. Uh, no. There was a very good question, if I can find it. Yes. In terms of keeping different copies of your work, that is easy when you're the sole writer, sending your work to someone else. But what about when you're co-writing with the director or someone else, and you're both working together on the same Google Doc or Final Draft document?
Yeah, no, again, really, really good question. So that's going to, if you're working in that way, so in copyright law, there is two ways that more than one writer can work together, or how their work is classified in terms of copyright. So if the work is written in such a way that the contributions of each individual writer can't be separated, then it's known as joint authorship. If the work is written in a way where the individual contributions can be separated, then it's known as co-authorship. So the classic co-authorship situation would be, say, a musical where one person wrote the lyrics and one person writes the music, and they're completely separate. The classic situation which you get with writers, particularly comedy writers, Galton and Simpson and people like that, where they basically sit down in a room together and knock the lines back and forth until they're satisfied with it, and then type each line individually. And I guess the kind of modern way of that working is if you are basically sharing the script back and forth between you. If you can't tell who's contributing what, if you're adapting the work as you go along and changing lines, then it's going to be a joint authorship situation. And the kind of presumption in a joint authorship is that you will own the rights 50-50 between you. But if you are in that situation, you are working closely with someone, you need to think about what's the legal terms between you. Yeah, and you know, the guild we're in, we haven't actually finished it yet, but we're currently working on a collaboration agreement where a group of creative people, it's more designed for a theatre thing, but it could be used for, you know, two writers working on a TV series or something.
Oh, right.
Is you know, are you going to share everything 50-50?
Yeah.
Or is one person providing, you know, more copyright? Is one person doing the bulk of the work and the other person is really kind of there to tweak and, you know, add lines and whatever? You know, think about that, because again, one of the sort of things that's happened in the last few years, there was a case around, I don't know if any of you remember the film, it's called Florence Foster Jenkins, which was about this American singer. I think it was what, 1920s, Gail? I think she was in the 20s, maybe a
I
bit
think it
earlier
was
than that.
later. No, I think it was later, but I mean, it was
Oh, well, anyway,
Meryl Streep and Hugh Grant.
Meryl Streep. Basically, it's about this singer who's so bad she's good, and it's a lovely little story, lovely little film, everything, you know, so very, very nice. It's written by two people who were in a romantic relationship, certainly at the time they started writing the film. And
I sense a sad story coming on here.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they kind of went through everything, these two people, but one of them was a more experienced screenwriter and had a few credits to his name. The other person was a much more experienced in music, and she was the one who knew the story of Florence Foster Jenkins. And they were working on the script together. And again, I think I've read a lot about this case, and I always come back to feeling it was just incredibly sexist, because the guy, the experienced screenwriter, was regarded as the writer, and the woman was just regarded as his girlfriend, basically, even though they all knew she was working with him and she was contributing a lot of stuff. And no one ever thought about giving her a contract or discussing with her what her credit or her payments were going to be. Nothing. They just cruised on into the, you know, the sunset. And the film's made, it's great success. I think she was nominated for an Oscar or something. But of course, they all end up in court, and because she hasn't got anything, she hasn't got a contract, she hasn't got a payment, and the judge went through a trial, court of appeal, another trial, and then she got awarded, I think, about 20% of the screenplay as a joint writer. So even if someone, so the kind of moral of the story, well, two morals is, one, if someone's creatively contributing to a project, they need a contract, and they need to recognize they're going to need a contract and they're going to need payment. And the other one is that even if someone is only contributing, you know, in a fairly minor way, it doesn't have to be 50-50. Even if it's only 20%, they still have the right to their 20%. It's not that they don't count at all. Even, you know, 20% is still copyright.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Robert. I'm going to have to start winding it up. I could speak to you for days about copyright, and probably have.
Yeah, we've had a few conversations.
Yes, we've worked at the Guild together many times. But what I was also going to say is, always it always boils down to have a contract, and in a partnership, a writing partnership, get the contract agreement, but partnership agreement between you very early, because the time to start fighting about who's written what is not when you've fallen out or one partner is pushed under a bus. Have it
Yeah.
before you
Oh,
start.
absolutely. Yeah, and I had again, I've got, this is my sort of famous anecdote about this. This is completely true. I had these two clients come to see me, this is quite a few years ago now, and they've written this amazing series of children's books. And one of them was a writer and one of them was the illustrator. And they were just, they were beautiful. The illustrations were lovely and the stories were really charming. And they've been working on this thing for 10 years and it was absolutely wonderful thing. And so I sat them down in my office, and we were they come to me to talk about contracts and stuff like that. They didn't have anything in writing. And so I started to talk to them and say, oh, so yeah, what are your plans for the book, and what's next, and how are you going to do this? And it became obvious that they had diametrically opposed ideas
Oh
about
dear.
the whole thing. That they couldn't agree on anything. One of them wanted, to sort of get a deal with a film company and make it into films. One of them said, no, I hate films. I'm never going to do that. That's not it. And everything they just totally disagreed on. And they ended up having this massive argument in front of me in my office, and stormed out. And I don't think they ever spoke to each other ever again.
Oh, I was going to say, it's nice to end our session with a happy story. Can you remind people where they can get your book, please?
Yeah, so it's called Copyright Made Easy, and if you look for it on Amazon, it's available there as a print book or as an ebook or even as an audiobook.
Yes, and I can recommend it because I have recommended it because I gave you a blurb
Yes,
for the
on the
cover.
cover.
Yes, Copyright Made, truly easy and a great read too. A must for content creators, and I do mean that. And I'm not even getting any money for saying this. I really want to thank you, Robert. If we couldn't answer your questions, because there were a lot of questions, please, members can always get in contact with the Guild. The Guild is always there for you. Go to the Guild website, you'll see our caseworkers, John, Eleanor, and Joe. And like I said, they're great people. They'll get back to you right away. And if you're a Guild member and haven't got an agent, the Guild will vet your contracts for you legally.
Yeah.
And when we need the big guns, Robert is our big guns, and Robert gets called in and will deal with cases. And can I say, Robert's been my lawyer as well for years, and thank you for keeping me out of prison for so long.
It hasn't been easy, I'll tell you that.